Now let's go to one of the greatest miracles that Jesus performed in chapter 6. Following the report of John's death, now Mark wants to talk about the ministry, and Mark returns to the account of the ministry of the 12, those whom Jesus sent out to preach and to heal. After they had completed that mission that Jesus gave them, they came back to Capernaum and related to Jesus all that they had done and taught, right? Yeah, they talked to Jesus. What kind of ministry that they had done? They kind of reported, they made a report of their ministry to Jesus. While they were doing this, the crowds continued to bring those in need of healing, right? A lot of people are still coming. So this happening in Capernaum. So much so that Jesus and his disciples did not have even time to eat. Wow. So busy with the ministry, not able to eat. To provide his disciples with some much needed rest, Jesus directed that they all get into a boat and go to a secluded spot, right? Because these people were so busy with the ministry. Jesus said, you need to get a rest, right? So let's go to a secluded place where no one will come. You know what happened? The crowds, seeing where they were heading, ran along the shore and arrived at the location ahead of them. The crowd ran ahead of these disciples, went to the shore because they knew that Jesus is going to take the disciples to a secluded place. All right. So what happened? Disembarking from the boat, and Jesus, seeing the crowds that had followed them, Jesus had what? Compassion, because this crowd is not leaving them. And Jesus saw them as sheep without a shepherd. Right? Something that we need to see. Right? Every time when you wake up and when you travel, when you look at people, yes, you look at with the same eye with Jesus. Right? People are there. They are sheep without a shepherd. Now, he began to teach them. He began to teach them. And the hour grew late. It became late. Disciples came to Jesus, suggested that dismiss the crowds. Please send them because it is so late. See, these people have been here for a long time. The area was somewhat remote, and the crowds would need to go into the surrounding villages to purchase something to eat. So this area that they were here, they were kind of remote place, and there's no food right there. They had to go to the village to get food. Wow. So Jesus responded by saying that the disciples themselves should provide food for the crowd. Wow. Jesus said, it's hard for them to go because it is already late. You are asking them to dismiss them. It's already late. You go and provide some food. They need to eat. Wow. There is a problem, right? Astonished at this, the disciple questioned him, asking whether he really intended that they should spend the exorbitant amount of the 200 denarii to feed the crowds, an amount that is probably far beyond their limited resources. So they have about 200 in their pocket. 200 denarii. Is it sufficient? Look at the crowd. So many. So many. We don't have money to feed them. You better send them away. But Jesus asked the disciples to look around and find out how much food they had. All right? He asked them to bring. Remember the story. They report they had 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Okay, all what they have is simply 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish, which is a common thing for Galileans, right? Bread and fish. And interestingly, I went to Israel. I went to Israel God gave me an opportunity to visit. And I found out that the fish that they were usually eating was sardines. You know that one? You know this fish, sardines? That is small little fish. What is one of the best fish in the world, probably? Sardines, which is maybe a little more, which is cheaper. Jesus was eating sardines. And throughout, they used to have fish. And one of the fish was sardines. It was there in Galilee a lot. And they used to dry the fish. Dry the fish. And people from other places, they used to go by through Galilee and this area and simply to get dry fish from this area, right? Like merchants will get dry fish, and sardine is one of the major the food fish that they were using, right? So now people are talking about a lot of the health benefits of sardines, omega-3. All right. To 2 fish and 5 loaves. Jesus commanded the crowds to sit in an organized groups. And they all sat down in groups of hundreds and 50s. Look at that one. Hundreds and 50s. So maybe some of them are hundreds, some of them 50s. So you know why? Because they can easily number. Jesus then took the loaves and fish and, having given thanks, divided the food for the disciples to distribute. As disciples returned to get more food to distribute, Jesus continued miraculously to hand out baskets of food until they all were full and satisfied. Continued from 5 loaves and 2 fish, baskets after baskets after baskets of food to people. Wow. Afterward, disciples found that they had 12 baskets full of the portions that they were left over. And 5,000 men had been fed, not counting the women and children. So that is the reason we say, okay, if there are 5,000 men, approximately there will be 5,000 wives, right? Because women and children. So approximately 5,000 wives, ladies. And if you say, okay, each couple had at least 2 children, I'm sorry, they will have many, many children, but at least 2 children, that means there will be at least 10,000 children. That means actually at least, let's take the least amount, there were about 20,000 people fed. 20,000 people were fed with this 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, which is so big, right? So big. Anyway, now Jesus walking on the water. Let's look at that also. This is also a famous example, famous miracle, right? Right after feeding of 5,000, Jesus directed his disciple to get into a boat and go to Bethsaida, another area of Galilee, on the other side of the lake, right? It says in the other side of the lake, Bethsaida. So remember, this is the Sea of Galilee, or the Lake of Galilee, is so huge, so big. This is another side. And while he stayed behind to send the crowds away, Jesus stayed behind there, like, because Jesus wants to send these 20,000 people away. So Jesus told the disciples, what do you do, disciples? You go to Bethsaida. You go to Bethsaida. Let me send them. After dismissing the crowd, Jesus went himself to a mountain to pray. Wow. Jesus is not going with the disciples. He's going alone to a mountain. And you'll see many times Jesus went alone to pray. Going alone to pray is very, very significant in the life of every disciple. Spending time alone. Yes, you may be praying in your church. You may be praying with your families, right? But that will never be equal to you pray alone. Because that tells you who really you are, your heart for God, right? The time that you spend alone before God tells what kind of person who you are before God. Praying in the church tells you what kind of person you are before the church members. Praying in your family, in front of your family members, tells you what kind of person you are in front of your family, right? Of course, nothing is wrong, right? You have to pray in the church, you have to pray in your family, but here's one more step. Praying alone tells what kind of person you are before God, right? Jesus did that many times. In about the fourth watch of the night, so they have watches, like it is like I think the first watch begins by 6 p.m. When you say this watch, this is actually like policemen. You have watchmen. Watchmen. This is like watchmen who what? Who watches the area, right? Like a soldier who has a duty. So every 2 hours, one group will have the duty to watch. We call watchmen. So they have watch hours, right? So there is first watch hour, second watch hour, third watch hour. So this is something like fourth watch of the night, 3 to 6 a.m. So that is the watch hour. So there are 4. Jesus returned to the lake. So it is early in the morning, right? Early in the morning. Jesus returned to the lake and saw that the disciples were still in the middle of the lake. Wow. Early in the morning. So these people, they send him at the night. Jesus dismissed all the crowds. So maybe it was really dark, really night. Jesus went to a place to pray. He wants to talk to his Father because he knows that his hour is getting closer. His time of his death is getting closer. He knows that. And he wants to talk to his Father, right? Because he's not only God, but he's also a human being. He wants to talk, communicate. Now comes back. And it is about early in the morning, still dark maybe. And Jesus, finding these disciples in the middle of the lake, straining at the oars because the wind was against them. That was a problem. They were not able to go to the other shore because the wind was against them. Because remember, in those days, all the ships were manured by wind, right? By the help of the wind. Now, intending to meet them on the other side, right? So what Jesus did, Jesus wanted to meet them on the other side. Jesus began walking on the surface of the wind-swept sea. Wind-swept sea. Jesus began walking. As he came abreast of the boat, closer to the boat, wow, disciples saw a figure. What did they see? a figure. Why? Why? Because it was still dark, early in the morning. Disciples saw a figure walking on the water and cried out in fear. How? Because they thought that it was a ghost. They thought it was a ghost. Wow, they couldn't. Why? Immediately what happened? Jesus spoke to them saying, hey, I am, right? And that they should not be afraid. Don't be afraid. This is me. Drawing alongside, Jesus, as the boat is moving, Jesus is moving alongside of the boat, not in the boat, but alongside. Now, Jesus got into the boat, and the winds that had been blowing hard suddenly ceased. So Jesus was walking aside the boat. Now Jesus enters. Suddenly what happened? No more wind. Disciples, taking all of this in, again were astonished at what they had seen. Right? Astonished. In spite of many miracles he had performed, including feeding of the 5,000, disciples were still somewhat blinded. Literally, their heart was hardened to the true nature of Jesus, and thus to the power and authority that belonged to him. Because that's what verse 50 says. Still, disciples they see every time the miracles of Jesus. Mark wants to present. First, he said, look at these people of Palestine. They don't get him. And now Mark wants to look at even his own disciples. They're not fully getting who really Jesus is. Which is interesting, right? Many Christians would be just like that. Maybe they've been Christian for years and still do not know the basic things of Christianity. Do not know. People are there, and so there can be people like that. Anyway,